Chapter 5. Amateurs Steal Valuables. Professionals steal objectives. Rain beat relentlessly against the windows of major crimes. Not the gentle kind, the kind that swallowed the city, the kind that erased footprints, washed away blood, and buried secrets. Inside the nearly empty office, Detective Edward Lawson hadn't moved in almost an hour. A fresh case file lay open before him. His untouched coffee had long gone cold. His eyes remained fixed on one page, one timeline, one detail. Again, 6 minutes. Exactly 6 minutes. Edward slowly reached into the evidence cabinet behind his desk. He removed another file. Gold Crown Jewelers, 2 years old. He placed it beside the new report. 2 crime scenes, 2 different locations, 2 years apart. His finger traced both timelines. Entry, 11:36 p.m. Alarm disabled, 47 seconds. Target secured, 6 minutes. Escape, under 2 minutes. Edward's jaw tightened. "No," he whispered. His office door opened. Chief Robert Harper stepped inside, carrying breakfast in a paper bag. "I figured you'd still be here." Edward didn't answer. Harper noticed both files lying open. "You've compared them all night?" Edward nodded. "They're identical." Harper sighed. "Copycats." Edward looked up. "No." He slowly pushed both files toward him. "Copycats make mistakes. They improvise. They miss details." He tapped both timelines. "These people don't." Harper frowned. "You think it's the same crew?" Edward stood, walking toward the evidence board. Daniel Carter's photograph still hung at the center. The photograph Edward refused to remove. He pinned the newest crime scene pictures beside it. The same entry time, the same escape window, the same security blind spots, the same discipline. He picked up another photograph, a shattered security camera. One bullet, straight through the center, exactly like Gold Crown. Harper folded his arms. "But Gold Crown ended 2 years ago." Edward slowly shook his head. "No. Our investigation ended. Theirs didn't." Silence filled the room. Edward stared at Daniel's photograph. "For 2 years. I've been chasing the wrong question." Harper looked confused. "What question?" Edward answered quietly. "I kept asking, who killed Daniel?" He turned. "The real question is, what were they willing to kill him for?" Police lights reflected across pools of water. Edward ducked beneath the crime scene tape. The smell hit him immediately. Wet concrete, machine oil, fresh sawdust, not blood. Interesting. He crouched near deep grooves carved into the warehouse floor. Someone had dragged something incredibly heavy, not carried, dragged. A forensic technician approached. "Morning, detective." Edward didn't look up. "What was taken?" 3 industrial safes. "Were they open?" "No. They took the entire safes." Edward studied the marks again. Heavy-duty pallet jacks, commercial rollers, professional equipment. No panic, no rush, just precision. He stood. "Show me where they entered." Minutes later, he found himself staring at the loading dock. The lock hadn't been forced, it had been picked. Cleanly, no scratches, no broken mechanism, no wasted movement. Edward smiled faintly. They knew exactly what they were coming for. The young detective beside him frowned. "You can tell that?" Edward nodded. "Amateurs steal valuables. Professionals steal objectives." Back at headquarters, Edward requested every document connected to the warehouse. Ownership records, import licenses, tax history. 5 minutes later, everything arrived. He flipped through the file. His expression darkened. Riverside Imports. 14 years in business. 0 legitimate imports. No customs declarations. No international suppliers. No active employees. No warehouse contracts. Harper looked over his shoulder. "That's impossible." Edward closed the folder. "No, it's intentional." He tossed it onto the desk. "This warehouse wasn't robbed." Harper looked at him. "It was hiding something." That afternoon, Edward parked outside Gold Crown Jewelers. Business had returned, at least on the surface. Luxury cars lined the street. Customers admired engagement rings beneath crystal lights. To anyone passing, everything looked normal. Edward knew better. He walked through the front doors. Richard Holloway spotted him instantly. His smile lasted less than a second. Detective Lawson, I wasn't expecting you. Edward smiled politely. I know. Inside Richard's office, neither man sat down. I assume this isn't a social visit. Edward placed photographs from the warehouse onto the desk. Richard barely looked. I've never seen that building. Edward ignored the answer. What was stolen from Gold Crown? Richard frowned. I already gave police the inventory. Edward remained silent. Richard shifted uncomfortably. I answered that question 2 years ago. Edward finally spoke. No. You answered what you could legally report. Richard's face froze, only for an instant. But Edward saw it. Fear. There it was. I don't know what you're implying. Edward stepped closer. I think you do. Silence. Richard looked toward the office door, almost instinctively. Edward noticed. You keep looking at the exit. Richard forced a laugh. I have appointments. No, Edward said quietly. You're wondering whether to lie again. The room fell silent. Richard slowly inhaled. I want my attorney. Edward nodded. I expected that. He gathered the photographs, then stopped at the door. Without turning around, he asked one final question. If I ask your business partners instead, will they tell me the same story? No answer. Edward smiled to himself. Sometimes, silence was the loudest confession. He walked out. The office door closed softly behind him. Richard remained standing. His breathing grew heavier. He stared at the closed door for several seconds. Then, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over one contact. He never pressed it. Instead, he quietly whispered to himself, he's getting too close. Richard Holloway didn't move for almost a minute. The office felt smaller now, quieter. He looked once more at the contact on his phone, then locked the screen. No, he muttered. If he finds out now, we're all finished. In the next morning, major crimes buzzed with activity. Phones rang. Detectives hurried past carrying files. Edward ignored all of it. A large whiteboard stood before him. Across the top, he wrote one sentence. What wasn't reported? Chief Harper walked over. That's your new theory? Edward nodded. For 2 years, we've investigated what victims told us was stolen. He turned toward Harper. What if they've all been lying? Harper frowned. Lying to police? They had reasons. Edward picked up the Gold Crown file. Richard Holloway couldn't report an illegal gemstone. He reached for another dusty file. Maybe the others couldn't report what they lost either. Harper looked at the growing pile of old case files. You think Gold Crown wasn't the only one? Edward looked him straight in the eye. I think Gold Crown was the pattern. By noon, Edward had tracked down every surviving business partner. 5 agreed to speak. 1 refused. The interviews began. The first partner, a wealthy real estate developer, barely let Edward finish his questions. I invested money. I never handled inventory. I trusted Richard. Edward studied him. The man wasn't scared. He was irritated, not useful. The second, a diamond exporter, lawyered up before Edward sat down. My client has nothing further to say. Edward stood. Sometimes, people hiding the truth talked less than innocent people. The third partner never arrived. His assistant claimed he'd flown to Dubai overnight. Edward wasn't surprised. Running was sometimes another confession. The fourth interview lasted almost an hour. Nothing. Excuses, contracts, paperwork. Edward left with more frustration than answers. The fifth meeting felt different the moment he walked inside. Harold Stein's office wasn't luxurious. No marble floors, no expensive paintings, just wooden shelves, old ledgers, dust. A man who had spent his life with numbers. Harold looked up before Edward spoke. I've been expecting you. Edward sat quietly. You know why I'm here? Harold nodded. I've known for 2 years. Silence settled between them. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Edward asked, what wasn't reported? Harold closed his eyes. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then, the old accountant stood, walked toward a steel filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, removed a worn leather folder. He held it for a long time, almost like it weighed more than paper should. I told Richard we should tell the truth. He wouldn't listen. Edward accepted the folder. Inside, private invoices, offshore transfers, encrypted shipping manifests, photographs. One photograph stopped him cold. A rough blue gemstone, larger than a man's fist, untouched, uncut, natural. Its surface caught the light like frozen lightning. Edward looked up. "What am I looking at?" Harold answered quietly. "The Kafaru stone." "I've never heard of it." "You were never supposed to." Harold sat back heavily. "It left Africa hidden inside industrial mining equipment. It never passed customs. It never appeared on a government document. It officially doesn't exist." Edward looked again at the photograph. "How much is it worth?" Harold laughed bitterly. "No one knows. It has never been sold. But private buyers estimated over $215 million. The number hung in the room. Edward slowly understood. Gold Crown hadn't lost millions in jewelry. It had lost one illegal fortune. Everything else had simply hidden the truth. Edward closed the folder. "So Richard lied." Harold shook his head. "He didn't lie about what he reported. He lied about what he didn't. He couldn't tell police. He would have confessed to international smuggling." Edward stood. Daniel had died protecting a robbery scene, without knowing what had actually been stolen. His chest tightened. For 2 years, he'd been mourning one story. The real story had never been written. Back at Major Crimes, Edward covered the evidence board with old robbery files. Gold Crown, Black Ledger Casino, North Harbor Storage, St. Vincent Auction House. Harper looked confused. "What are you doing?" Edward circled every case. "Looking for the invisible theft." "The invisible what?" Edward picked up the Black Ledger file. "Official report," he read aloud. $2 million in casino cash." He tossed it aside. "I don't believe it." Harper folded his arms. "Why?" Edward pointed toward the crime scene photographs. "The crew bypassed stacks of cash. They ignored jewelry. They ignored expensive liquor. They spent 8 minutes inside one locked basement office." Harper frowned. "I remember this case." "It was an illegal casino." Edward nodded. "Not just gambling." He opened another intelligence report. Underground betting, money laundering, private auctions, and one line highlighted in red: suspected child fighting operations. Harper's expression darkened. "I remember trying to shut this place down." Edward looked at the photographs again. They didn't rob gamblers. They robbed criminals. He slowly closed the folder. And whatever they took, the owners could never report. The room fell silent. For the first time, the entire investigation finally made sense. Every robbery, every victim, every lie, every missing piece, they had never stolen what police thought they stole. Miles away, Mirabelle Lawson stood alone in her kitchen. Morning sunlight filled the room. Ethan's cereal bowl sat untouched. She looked at the clock. 8:17. Edward hadn't come home. Again. She picked up her phone. 3 missed calls. Anthony Reynolds. She stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down. A moment later, it vibrated again. This time, a message. "Anthony, I know I shouldn't keep asking, but I'd really like to see you, even if it's just coffee." Mirabelle read it twice. Before she could reply, her phone rang again. "Mom," she answered. "Morning, Mom. I heard from Linda." Mirabelle sighed. "You've been crying again." "I'm fine." "No, sweetheart. You've been saying you're fine for 2 years." Silence. Her mother continued. "Edward loves that case more than he loves coming home." Mirabelle closed her eyes. "Please don't. I'm only telling you what everyone sees." Another pause. "Anthony asked about you." Mirabelle didn't answer. "He's done well for himself. He still talks about you. He always treated you right." Mirabelle looked toward the empty dining chair where Edward should have been. Her mother spoke softly. "You can't keep waiting forever." The call ended. Mirabelle remained standing, looking at Anthony's message, looking at the empty chair. Then, for the first time, her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Coffee sounds okay." She pressed send. Night settled over the city. Edward was still in Major Crimes. The evidence board no longer looked like a robbery investigation. It looked like a map of lies. Gold Crown Jewelers, Black Ledger Casino, North Harbor Storage, 3 robberies, 3 different victims, 3 different reports. Yet, the same precision, the same timing, the same escape pattern, the same missing truth. Edward uncapped a marker. Across the center of the board he wrote, "They don't steal what people can report." He stepped back. Then another thought struck him. He slowly circled every victim. Richard Holloway, Black Ledger Casino, North Harbor Storage. None of them had called the police immediately. Each had delayed reporting the crime minutes, hours, in one case. Almost an entire day, Harper noticed. "What?" Edward pointed at the timeline. "They all waited." "Why?" Harper shrugged. "They were in shock." Edward slowly shook his head. "No, they were deciding how much of the truth they could afford to tell us." Silence. For the first time, Harper looked genuinely disturbed. "If you're right," Edward finished the sentence, "then every robbery we've solved was never actually solved." Edward reopened the Black Ledger Casino file. Crime scene photographs covered the desk. Broken poker tables, bullet holes, stacks of gambling chips. Police photographs labeled, "Cash stolen, $2 million." Edward ignored them. Instead, he picked up the intelligence reports: illegal gambling, money laundering, weapons trafficking, underground child fighting. One paragraph caught his attention: private vault beneath the casino. He looked at Harper. "Did we ever search it?" Harper frowned. "It was empty." Edward smiled faintly. "Exactly." Harper looked confused. "What are you saying?" Edward tapped the report. "We searched it after the robbery." He paused. "What if—" "Well, that's what they came for?" Harper folded his arms. "So what was inside?" Edward looked toward the evidence board. "I don't know, but I know whoever owned it could never report it missing." Harper slowly nodded. "The same as Gold Crown." Edward smiled. "We're finally seeing their business model. They don't rob innocent people. They rob criminals. They steal things their victims can't admit they own." Harper looked around the office. "So who's choosing the targets?" Edward stared at the board. "That's the person I'm hunting." Across town, Mirabelle sat inside a quiet cafe. She checked the time. Anthony arrived moments later. Older, sharper, confident. He smiled warmly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Mirabelle managed a small smile. "I wasn't sure either." Anthony pulled out a chair. "No pressure. If you want to leave after 5 minutes, I'll understand." She sat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Anthony broke the silence. "I heard about Daniel." Mirabelle nodded. "It changed everything." "I know. It changed Edward." She looked down at her coffee. "It did." Anthony hesitated. "I don't want to be the man who takes advantage of that." Mirabelle looked at him. "Then don't." Another silence. Anthony smiled gently. "So, tell me about Ethan." For the first time that day, Mirabelle smiled. She talked about Ethan's basketball, his sense of humor, how much he loved his father. Then, her smile faded. "He keeps asking when Edward's coming home." Anthony didn't know what to say. Neither did she. That evening, Edward finally returned home. The house was quiet. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing his basketball jersey. His homework lay unfinished beside him. Edward gently picked up the blanket, covered his son, then noticed something: an MVP certificate, folded beneath Ethan's backpack. Second place. Edward closed his eyes. He had missed another game, another memory, another promise. Behind him, Mirabelle stood silently. "You made it home." Edward turned. "I'm sorry." "You always are." She walked upstairs. Edward didn't follow. He simply looked at the certificate in his hands. The case was finally moving. His family was moving without him. The following morning, Edward received a call. Harold Stein. His voice shook. "I need to see you. Now." 20 minutes later, Edward pulled into Harold's office parking lot. Something felt wrong. 2 police cruisers already blocked the entrance. Yellow tape stretched across the sidewalk. Edward jumped from the car. A uniformed officer recognized him. "Detective." Edward looked past him. Harold's office door hung open. Furniture overturned. Glass shattered. A paramedic slowly covered a body with a white sheet. Edward froze. No! He pushed forward. The officer tried to stop him. Detective, Edward pulled back the sheet. Harold Stein. One gunshot wound. Clean. Professional. No struggle. No witnesses. No murder weapon. Edward looked around the room. Everything Harold had given him was gone. Every file, every photograph, every document, except one, taped neatly to the accountant's desk, a white business card, no fingerprints, no handwriting, only one embossed black symbol, a chess king. Edward stared at it, his breathing slowed. Whoever killed Harold knew exactly what he'd revealed. They were watching, not just the evidence, not just the investigation. Edward. Across the city, morning cameras flashed outside a newly opened children's cancer center. Politicians applauded. Business leaders smiled. Television crews crowded the entrance. At the center of it all, a tall man in an immaculate navy suit stood beside the mayor. Late 30s, calm, confident, charismatic. His smile seemed effortless. Children ran toward him. He knelt to greet them. A reporter stepped forward. Charles Bennett, you've donated another $15 million to children's healthcare. Why do you keep giving so much away? Charles smiled. My father taught me something. The measure of a man is what he leaves behind. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed again. Charles shook hands, signed autographs. No one noticed. A black SUV quietly pulling away from the rear entrance. Inside, a man placed a newspaper on the seat beside Charles. The headline read, Detective reopens Gold Crown robbery. Charles glanced at it, then calmly folded the paper. So, he said with a faint smile, Detective Lawson finally found the right door. The driver looked into the mirror. Should we be worried? Charles looked out the window at the cheering crowd. No. A small smile crossed his face. He's still looking for a robber. He adjusted his cufflinks. He hasn't realized he's hunting a businessman. Charles stepped out of the vehicle. The crowd applauded again. To the city, he was a philanthropist, a visionary, a man changing lives. To Edward, he didn't exist. End of chapter 5.